So, hello, first of all, thank you to the organizers and the sponsors for inviting me to speak today. My name is Jesse Pyeatt. I'm an architect with NBBJ based in Hong Kong. And I think the presentations today have been lovely for me as an international architect to see some of the work here and be so inspired by this sense of material, of light, of the way that local materials are applied in these beautiful projects, and also to see some similarities with what my firm does around the world. So kind of see that we're speaking the same language, and to see that we're open to that dialogue is really interesting. So kind of the title for today, for what I'm speaking about, is Design for Life, which doesn't really seem to mean anything, and I'll layer into that so you can understand what I'm getting at. But really briefly, what we often run into at NBBJ is we ask if anyone knows who we are, and we're one of the smaller big firms. So people aren't necessarily familiar with us. So as a really quick introduction, we are a very old firm. At this point, the firm is more than 75 years old. We were started in 1943 by these four gentlemen after World War II, and they really started making hospitals. And they're also where our name comes for, Mr. Naramore, Bain, Brady, and Johansson. So this is interesting because we're in our third generation in this firm. So the original leaders have long since passed. The second round of leaders have passed. And now we're at a point when the structure of our firm isn't as clear. There's not one person who makes the magic sketch that we all follow. It's much more of a lumpy hierarchy, more democratic. And we'll get into that more. So as I mentioned, we're a big firm. Headquarters is in Seattle, Washington, which is where those four gentlemen started. And now we're 10 offices and about 700 people around the world. The most recent office is Hong Kong, which is where I'm located, where we have 6 people. So I practice in a very small design studio, which is part of a much bigger networked firm, which is interesting because it's really me and 6 of my colleagues just sketching on trace paper all day. It's not a huge floor plate. It's not anonymous. So as we've been around for a while, there are some awards that we have. But actually, the most interesting things, this laser pointer shows up, is maybe this bubble in the upper left, where 80% of our projects are from repeat clients. And that's really something we wear as a badge of honor because it means there's something about how we work, how we design, and our process that keeps people coming back and working with us. The second point is the one next to it, which is an award that we've gotten 3 times in the last 5 years by a publication called Fast Company. Fast Company is an American magazine that talks about business, design, and technology. And to them, we are most innovative in the way that we improve well-being in our design, which is really what I want to talk about today. And so we do work over many, many different scales. Of course, we do corporate work. That top line is important. Companies like Google, Tencent, Samsung, because they're tech companies. And they let us be a little bit more playful about what we study, the tools that we develop, how we approach design. But what actually gets more interesting is when we take that approach and we apply it to commercial work, to hospitals, to education, so that in some ways we can take these lessons learned and help people come to more interesting conclusions about their work. And first, don't read all the text. It's way too much. But when I was coming up with this talk, I was rereading articles and books, and I came back to this piece by Phil Bernstein. He's the Associate Dean of Architecture at Yale, called New Methods, New Results. And in this, Mr. Bernstein is really saying that our generation of architects is at a really interesting point. We have technology, and we should be at the point when it's going beyond using 3D and digital tools to fabricate things. But it's actually, we should be at a point in which we should be able to understand how projects will perform, how the space impacts people, how it improves their lives. And you could sum all that down into 2 words: digital tectonics. or the digital art of putting things together. And I don't mean just glass and metal. I mean the space itself. So getting back to this tagline, we design for life. The we is interesting because, again, we're in our third generation. And in our firm, although we're big, we really do believe that the best idea can come from anywhere. It could be the senior designer in office. It could be an intern. It could be in a coordination meeting with a structural engineer. And so we design in that way, and as a result, all of our projects look really different. The last word, life, is really this idea that because of these digital tools, we want to better understand how space impacts human experience. And this is something that was talked about in nearly every presentation today. Light, movement, community, these are all critical. So in comes this gentleman. This is Dr. John Medina. He's a neuroscientist. He's a professor at University of Washington, and he's a research fellow with my company. So we work with Dr. Medina to really understand scientifically how space impacts your brain. Not just that it's nice to look out a window and see a tree, but it actually changes the way the neurons in your brain fire. You're smarter. And he helped us come up with kind of like 5 tenets. And everyone presenting today talked about these. The first one, activity, community, connections to nature, places that reduce stress, and that really things should be mentally stimulating, and helped us quantify these. For example, the first one, space should make you move. When you're actually walking across a stage or through a city, your brain works differently. The neurons actually take in information differently. So if you have an architectural space where instead of having a meeting where you all sit down around a table, if you actually gather your colleagues and go for a walk, you'll actually come to different conclusions. Your brain will actually work differently. And you should think about that. So these are kind of 5 tenets that we try to bake into all of our projects. And there's this idea that architecture should help you do this. It shouldn't be an office with a desk where you sit down all day. But actually, across a day, you should be able to use a space, a piece of architecture in many different ways. Some active, some passive, some for work, some for collaborating. And this kind of diversity in architecture is really what brings out all these other points. So I'll get into some examples of these, but to give you a sense of how we're wired in our design process, we're rather computational about how we design. So this first one is a tool that we've developed, some of our architects, working with Google's API, and it's an app. And going back to what I was saying about walking, you could pull open this app on your phone or your laptop, and you could say, okay, I need to walk, have a meeting, maybe for 30 minutes. And instead of going into that meeting room, you actually pull this open. It sources Google Maps for where all the parks are, pedestrian walkways, and gives you suggestions on ways where you might be able to walk and walk past more gardens, more trees. Because again, all of that impacts how your brain works. And this seems like kind of an academic exercise, but I was playing with it last night. And because it sources from Google Maps, I could pull it open in Ho Chi Minh and look at what the walk would be around Saigon Center, where I'm currently staying. So it's also scalable and deployable around the world. Another example, again, some of our more computational architects, is taking these same ideas and developing something that we actually put into some of our offices where we've developed a sensor that collects information on sound, temperature, light, and motion, and then ports to a phone where someone could actually open this and look at a floor plate and understand what areas are louder, and see those, what areas are brighter, and even what areas have more people walking around. And this seems kind of silly. You could also open your eyes and look around and see these things. But if you think about the way that maybe offices are being developed, where fewer and fewer people are coming to the office, more and more people are working abroad or out of the office, this gives more options, more understanding of different ways to use space, and allows people to be more efficient. And again, this is an app that we developed as an architecture company. So there should be something about the way that you can leverage digital technology. Finally, this kind of becomes architectural. So on top of this, there are tools impacting design process, where we can develop a floor plate and test it. So in this case, we're actually working on a tool that we use with our design teams, where you can take a floor plate and, going back to those ideas that Dr. Medina gave us, tests areas that are less connected between users and more connected. And this kind of looks like Pac-Man right now, a dot moving around. But then you can test it across a floor plate. And it gives you kind of this rainbow visibility. Lets you see areas that are more connected, where you might go when you want to collaborate. And then also areas that are more shut down, when you just need to focus. And this is a lean tool in that when we're modeling something, we can test it on top of a Rhino model, on top of a CAD plan, and test option against option to see which ones are actually performing better. And then we've developed these tools to test multiple things: visual connectivity, access to daylight, circulation efficiency, prospect and refuge. And all these are things that people are talking about in the presentations today. We're just tying them back to data to figure out how they're actually changing the way that you think. So we're trying to help quantify what we kind of already know as designers and architects. So, enough about theoretical. There are 3 projects I want to talk about today. And they're looking at ideas of circulation, connectivity, and amenities in 3 different recent architectural projects. So the first of these is the Tencent headquarters. This was recently, oh, thank you. Someone was telling me to eat the mic. Cheers. Was recently completed in Shenzhen, just north of Hong Kong. So in this project, we started with a client that needed a campus. They wanted something that covered the urban fabric, but they didn't have that as a zoning right. They only had area for a tower. And sticking to a traditional typology, that would be an office with some amenities in the bottom. Very simple diagram. But they had some different opinions about how they want to do this. So first we helped them think about how they might start to separate that tower and then actually optimize the massing so that a slightly taller tower would help shade a shorter one, so energy savings. Then looking at that block at the bottom, it's supposed to be a campus. So the idea that these would actually become amenity bars that are moved up into the building and create bridges at multiple levels. And this is a bridge for culture, a bridge for health, a bridge for knowledge. And that then, being site-specific, we would actually kind of crank the building open to take advantage of the best views, to bring air between the buildings, and then to provide the most pleasant space for green roofs on top of all these bridges, all trying to improve the human experience and life in this building day to day. So what resulted was, on the left, what would be a very traditional flat campus, a master plan. And we took this and rotated it, and hopefully getting the same idea of offices, of amenities, of landscape, and because of the bridges also have the same ideas of circulation. There are different paths that you can take throughout the day, different ways to connect from place to place. And because, again, we're a bit computational about things, in the competition for this project, we also wanted to show the client, Tencent, how these bridges would actually improve the connections between their employees. Because we're talking about 2 towers, and if you're going to make the bridges, you need to understand the amenities, the way that you can cross, and the way that it'll actually reduce travel distance. If a colleague in the top of the tower on the north has to go to the bottom of the tower on the south, how do they do that? Or could they do it somewhere else? So these are recent photos, not renderings. But again, really showing the emphasis on those bridges and having a client who really kind of bought into the idea of making these a powerful statement in the architecture. But they're not just symbolic, they really are amenities. So at the bottom, the so-called cultural link is of course where you arrive from bus stations, reception, but is also where there's a conference facility, food and beverage, and then quite near to this is the first block of workplace. So people can get to desks quite easily from here in 2 different blocks. And then if they need a break in their day, they move up to the more active health link in the middle. So here, because it is a rather large space, we had space for a full height climbing wall, a fully indoor basketball court, and then, going back to connectivity, a running track that actually interlaces between the towers. Then, just on top of this, and as you get to the next block of offices, and on top of all of the bridges, are again green roofs. So if you just want to get out and walk past plants, you can do that. Or if you don't feel like being outside, at the upper link, we provide that same opportunity with internal gardens. And here's where there are also meeting rooms, libraries, and again, kind of the head of the project, if you will. So here's a bit of a fly-through, just showing how it's really come together. But you'll see those links, the culture at the bottom, health, connecting in the middle so you can always get that break from your desk. And then at the top, this knowledge link where you put meeting rooms. And then earlier I was mentioning that the towers are optimized so that you get these green roofs in the middle where air is coming through, but also that the taller tower is shading the shorter one, reducing solar gain. And that the facade that we've developed is then also positioned in such a way to be self-shading. The thicker elements block the harshest sun. So again, enhancing the performance of the architecture. So it's not just a facade for the sake of a facade, it's performative, which is what we try to do in all of our projects. And of course, the logo at the end. So that's the first, again, about networking, about a vertical campus. The second project I want to show is a similar kind of client on the other side of the world. This is the Samsung North America headquarters. So this is in San Jose in California. And here, similarly, we had a client who wanted to first talk about a campus, which if you visited San Jose or most of America, means buildings stretched out that you drive through from one building to the next. And we took a similar approach here. We actually wanted them to think about stacking, to bring all of their people together into one project, one area. But what they had from a zoning perspective was pretty straightforward. 2 small towers and a lot of parking, because it's America and everyone drives a car. So our proposal was that actually if they pushed back a little bit, they could find a better way to do the project. They could connect the towers, move the parking to the side, and then centralize things a bit more. Stack the parking further so that you free up that landscape, and then reshape the way that the towers work so it really feels like one architecture, which frees you up to actually cover things in kind of a blanket, if you will, of landscape. But that shouldn't just be at the bottom. It should also be at every 2 or 3 floors of the building. So again, you could always be at your desk and get away and be able to get out to greenery. So when this came together, there was 1 tower at the top, a 2nd tower at the bottom, and each of these were linked by atrium, number 3, which made it so there is always a way to get to amenities from your desk quite easily. So again, each office area always has quick access to the centralized space. But one thing that we heard along the way from the client was that if their employees were on different floors, they might as well be in a different country. The people just weren't going to take the time to go up and down the lifts. So this really, again, kind of made us dig in about the importance of these atria, and also made us want to think about proving the value of the atrium a little bit. So again, we set up a model where we could test floor plates. In this case, look at a day in the life of a building, imagining one person and seeing if they walk around, if they go to these atria, what does that mean for the calories they spend? Because they are getting up, they are moving. As well as how many other people are they seeing just because they got up and walked away from their desk? Which, if a company is about idea generation, and that's the same for architects, tech companies, we are all about ideas. The more times you bump into someone throughout the day and talk to them about what you're doing, the better ideas you're going to have. Because someone else is going to be working on a similar problem, or will poke back at you a little bit about yours. And that's going to get you to a more innovative result. So again, we were really, by the virtue of having a client who's willing to let us have some rope, testing the ideas and proving them. And this actually worked out really well in that when I was talking about the greenery in between buildings, if you look at the section on the left, every 3 floors, we have a garden that occurs at that bridge. So again, there's always a place to get out to greenery. On a few floors, it is a putting green. On others, it's a garden. There's one location where they have a small gym outdoors. But this really created an office building where landscape and amenities were central to it, with public landscape at the bottom that anyone can walk through, bridges that connect the towers, the atriums, green roofs, and really providing this model where, again, from any desk, you could only need to go up or down 1 floor to get to greenery, to get to an atrium, to get to amenities. So very different from the offices that most of us get to work in, but a really interesting way to think about architecture. So finally, the last project I wanted to talk about, which is actually a really interesting counterpoint to the images of the Louvre that Mr. Tree was showing, is the Amazon spheres. Recently constructed and opened, this is in Seattle, Washington. It's just a small part of the larger Amazon campus that we've been working on there. But similarly, it went back to first poking back a little bit at the narrowest definition of the project from a code perspective. So if we just did the basic interpretation, we would have had 6 small buildings. And working with the client and also the local government, there was an understanding that we could actually improve the ground plane, make it a better public place by stacking those buildings and opening things up a little bit. And then could actually improve the urban fabric by optimizing those buildings, rotating some so that we create a center point, but also making sure that all of the towers have the best views and aren't overshadowing one another. And this resulted in kind of a logical center point where something could happen. And it ended up being the spheres, but at first we just knew it was amenities. It's public space where the Amazon employees and the public could overlap. And with this client, during the design process, there was this question about what was missing. What else did we need to put into the design? And really what we heard was that the missing element was a link to nature. So we grabbed onto that. We really took it to heart. And so this really became, maybe a bit like the Louvre, the focal point to this project. Spheres. And as a concept, the idea was that it was a place of respite, a place to get away from your desk, to get away from the city, to literally get into a bubble of fresh air. And going back to nature, it became really an urban greenhouse. So if you know Seattle, it's gray, it's rainy, and except for about 2 or 3 months, it's not the most pleasant place to live. So we were really providing an environment that year-round would have light, it would have pleasant temperature. It could be a place that the employees could get a break. And going back to those earlier tenants that I was talking about, gave the ability to circulate walking paths, gave the choice for meeting rooms, small places to get a coffee, or just a place to go meet some of your colleagues to get your head out of your job for a little bit, to think a little bit differently and have a better idea. So as an architecture, they're interesting, but also rather complex. And again, being computational, we spent a lot of time thinking about how to put this together. So as a pattern study, there are literally hundreds of structural diagrams that we worked through with MKA. They're a structural engineer. And we really needed to find the right one, not that just one that fit and could be fabricated, but one that would also be scaled appropriately. And there was this idea that once we found the right shape for the cube, which is already advanced geometry, we also need to find a scale for it and an orientation that made the most sense. Because when you were in the cube, you want it to feel human scaled. So that the position of the structure and the openings, the entry points, would all be scaled around a person. So assuming that we could figure out the enclosure, an equal challenge was just how do you design the inside? How do you understand the human experience? And here, really trying to find this kind of magic point, ignore the small bubbles, the small text. But this point right here, where for humans, for us, this is maybe a comfortable temperature zone. But for plants, maybe it's not. So needing to pack this building with systems so that during the day we could overlap. So it was comfortable for you and me to go there. And then at night, when hopefully most of the people go home, you can lower the temperature, raise the humidity, and that's the best possible place for the 40,000 some odd plants that are in this cube or in this sphere. And so this really became that center focal point. These 3 spheres of 5 floors of different amenities, meeting spaces, all around greenery, really getting a break from the office and from the city. And that's the last piece I wanted to show you. So hopefully there are questions that you can ask later. And otherwise, thank you so much.